why World War Z is a better Left 4 Dead than Back 4 Blood. That's right, I said it. And from the general grumblings, I'd wager that not too many people are going to come to the defense of Back 4 Blood. Back 4 Blood is the spiritual successor to the classic Left 4 Dead series instead of its sequels, mainly because Valve refuses to count to the most basic of levels. All right, now say it with me. 1, 2.
Sharon Holt submitted this recipe for easy pancakes, and she commented, "This recipe doesn't require much thought early in the morning."
We lost him.
Great.
Anyways, but instead of being the highly anticipated sequel to a FPS classic, it ends up being a sad, corporatized, soulless husk vaguely puppeted by the people who made the original. World War Z, however, is instead inspired by the classic Left 4 Dead series and pays homage and does its best to modernize and maybe even take some steps forward instead of just making it new with pretty graphics. In this video, I will be covering all the things that I think, remember that is the key there, I think, that make World War Z better than Back 4 Blood, and how it tries to move the genre forward, as well as whining and bitching about what Back 4 Blood gets so wrong. I'll be covering visuals, sound design, enemies, level/mission structure, characters, weapons and the weapon selection, and progress. This is going to be a long one, so grab a snack and maybe check the description for timestamps if you need to take a break and come back, because we're going balls deep into World War Z and Back 4 Blood. So real quick, I'm going to clarify that the version of World War Z that I will be mainly referencing is World War Z Aftermath. This is the most recent version of it, and if you were to buy this from a store today, it would be the version that you get by default. If you had the original version, you would have to pay for the upgrade. This upgrade comes with extra classes, more missions, more weapons. When it is relevant to the conversation, I will do my best to separate the original and Aftermath, the DLC, even though that technically it is what you would get today. Also, before we get started, even though I shouldn't have to, let me make one thing clear. All of this is my personal opinion, and as much as I don't prefer Back 4 Blood, I still think it's fun. I just don't prefer it. If you think that Back 4 Blood is an instant classic and it's perfect, don't let me tell you otherwise. Have as much fun as you would want. But if you gave World War Z a try at the beginning and maybe just fell off, I can relate to this. When World War Z first came out, it would force you to play with other players instead of filling empty spots with bots. This meant that if I only wanted to play with my buddy Nate, well, we would have to play with 2 randos as well. Later on, they fixed this, and then with the World War Z Aftermath on top of this, it also makes it worth another try if you're maybe just looking for something else that can scratch that Left 4 Dead itch better than Back 4 Blood. Also, World War Z adds first-person shooter mode, and I much prefer it. So let's go ahead and start with visuals.
What? She said!
Both games thread a real fine line between just cartoony enough to stay away from the uncanny valley, but just real enough to make each character look like a living, breathing character. Both character models are each well designed and have a lot of detail. The enemies are varied. Normal zombies and Ridden have various clothes on or various wounds already on them, making you think, is that how they got infected? The environment of both games do a really great job with textures and making it feel like a real place. But I think World War Z gets the slight advantage here because the draw distance. Both games lead you down very specific corridors, whether they be inside or outside, but both find believable ways to keep you going in one direction. Things like debris, piled up cars, and so on. And they both even have larger areas for exploring. But at the end of the day, it's a one-way in and out. But World War Z goes out of its way to show you these large vistas, the world outside the on-the-rails feel of what you're allowed to play in. It sets up the scale, not just for these grandiose set pieces as you watch zombies wash over everything like a wave, but also the scale of the world that you live in. Back 4 Blood visually does not do this. Each level feels like a level from a video game. Go from A to B, rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. It doesn't help that the start of several levels literally have you start in the same place. This is no longer a global threat, but a neighborhood threat. On one hand, I can see what they were trying to do, make it feel like you're fighting for this plot of land, making every level seem interconnected. But considering how linear the levels are, this only magnifies just how linear they are. In World War Z, you fight all over the world. New York to Jerusalem to Russia and Tokyo, making it feel like this world exists even if you weren't there. I would argue that even Left 4 Dead did this better. While you could argue you just go from one area to the next, each area can feel different from the last. What further helps this is the fact that Left 4 Dead picks a theme for each chapter and is still able to keep things fresh there. That way, even if you're in a city on one level and a city on another, one looks more like a California or Florida style city and another one is inspired by New Orleans. By setting the whole story in this one area, it leaves the visuals pretty samey because logically all of this needs to exist in the same certain amount of square miles, in the same zip code, in the same area code. So let's move on to sound design.
Mom, check your fire! What the hell are you doing in front of me anyway?
Get off my train!
When it comes to sound, there is such a difference that you may just have to experience it yourself. You will never understand just how much you miss good sound design until it's gone. So I played World War Z right before Back 4 Blood, so I could sort of have a baseline for a modern Left 4 Dead attempt. And then I proceeded to only play Back 4 Blood for about a week. I returned to World War Z and I was greeted like an old friend. I started to weep with pure joy and ecstasy. You see, the special zombies from World War Z actually make sounds, and they are different depending on what type of zombie it is. In Back 4 Blood, they all seem to make noises, but I can never really pinpoint what it is and most importantly where it is coming from. World War Z just has great 3D audio. Not only can you hear the difference between zombies, but you can use that audio to hunt them down, to take down said zombie. Back 4 Blood just doesn't. Considering these are the same makers of Left 4 Dead, I am just baffled as to how this happened. One of the only reasons I know if it's a wretch approaching me versus a hawker is because a character yells it out, which first off always seems to be right next to me regardless of where my character is. And second, thanks for the shout out, but I just think that Left 4 Dead and World War Z figured out the formula for good sound design. Left 4 Dead has a spawn sound, an active sound, and an attack sound for all special zombies. And if you miss all of that, it still gives you plenty of warning with this iconic chime. Hear this and your ears will immediately perk up and you will start to listen closely for more audio cues, the direction they're coming from, and even the distance of that noise. If I hear something in Back 4 Blood, 99% of the time it's too late. They are right next to you and already attacking. And while World War Z doesn't do maybe as good as Left 4 Dead in the sound department, it does a great job regardless. While it doesn't have a chime go off every time a special zombie spawns, you still identify what type, where, and how far away it is. Keep in mind, these audio cues are so obvious and clear that you can hear them even over game chatter, over people talking about their days. Then there's the voice acting.
Hurry. Stevie, tell me there are no more gates.
Only the pearly ones, boss.
World War Z is solid all around, with people all around the world being represented. The only negative, and that definitely belongs in quotes because I had to stretch, but everyone's so serious. It could be easy to take some of it as melodramatic, but it's the apocalypse. Who's cracking jokes? Right? Back 4 Blood has good voice actors, and then it has some that just kind of read their lines.
We may have stemmed the tide, but I've got a feeling the worst is yet to come.
Enemies are up next. The Boomer, the Hunter, the Spitter. All these enemies are so iconic that they almost guarantee to show up in a zombie game. So how do these games handle them? World War Z has the Hazmat Zombie, the Lurker, the Screamer, the Bull, the Infector, the Bomber, and a special one I find really unique in a zombie survival game, and that is the Survivor Zombie. These are made by a player dying, and if the player dies, they actually return as a zombie with slightly better speed and resistance to damage. In the case of Left 4 Dead and Back 4 Blood, both of them follow around immune people. So this is a nice change of pace that you could actually become one of them. And the best/worst part is you have to watch as your character attacks your friends, and there's just nothing you can do about it. Really puts things in perspective. Now, Back 4 Blood enemies. They are Hawker, Stalker, Stinger, Wretch, Exploder, Reeker, Bruiser, Crusher, Tallboy, Snitcher, Hag, Sleeper, Breaker, Ogre. There's a lot of ers in there. Now, by the sheer numbers, Back 4 Blood technically wins, but by the title of this video and the fact that I said technically, you can probably guess that's not the end of it. The enemies for Back 4 Blood have 3 major problems. 1, as stated before, there are little to no audio cues for special. This includes spawning in and sometimes even just movement. 6 of these enemy types are pretty big, and maybe we shouldn't get the Jurassic Park sound of lumbering steps, but they definitely should be pretty loud based on their size. Rat.
Need that.
I don't have no thinking explosive. Wretch! I got her. I fucking knifed her. Oh, Jesus! The second problem. They seem to have the same spawning behavior as they would if they were in multiplayer. In multiplayer, you can walk around in ghost form and spawn in wherever you want as long as you're not in clear eyesight of cleaners. This seems to be the same in the co-op, because they seem to spawn and immediately be on you in seconds. No warning, no time to prepare, and you are almost guaranteed to have damage given to you. Here is a perfect video explaining the enemy balancing. It can give you some great reference to what I'm trying to get at here. Another problem with the spawning is how manufactured it can feel. When you get here, you're always guaranteed an ogre. Considering there are a few bigger zombies to choose from, it would have been nice to see the signature random game director that they had from Left 4 Dead. And the third and worst problem about the enemies themselves is their design. Out of 14 types, 9 are just variations of each other. Let's start with the Exploder, Reeker, and Wretch. These are big fat zombies, and from a distance or just a glance, which once again you rarely get to see them from afar, but even just at a glance it can be hard to determine what exactly is attacking you, which also affects how you should be fighting back, or even where their weak spot is located. Too many precious seconds are just spent trying to determine what is coming at you before it just attacks.
Hang up. Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. Intel has told us there are at least 7.
Okay, I already see one. Give them. Okay.
They're the same picture.
Next is the Stinger, Stalker, and Hawker. All 3 of them can jump on walls. All 3 have slender frames. 2 of them shoot projectiles. 1 does just damage while the other one webs you to the ground. And even when they're shooting something at you, it's hard to determine what it is until it hits you. And the worst of them all is the Bruiser, Tallboy, and Crusher. All 3 are tall. Yeah. And all 3 have a signature big right arm. So once again, it's hard to determine what is attacking you until it happens. But the worst is the 2, the Bruiser and the Tallboy. They will come at you with their weak spot behind them, making it almost impossible to attack them unless you or one of your teammates somehow gets behind them, which, based on some of the limited level design, is really hard. More on that later. And then you can get corruption cards, and you can get things like ferocious versions or armored versions. Imagine 3 zombies all coming at you, hiding their weak spots behind them. And even if you get a good angle on them, or you wait and dodge an attack, the weak spot takes an additional 10 to 15 extra shots just to get rid of the armor over the weak spot. In Left 4 Dead and World War Z for that matter, each special zombie has a very distinct look to them. You could determine what is coming at you and therefore prioritize what to focus on. But even if they are far away, out of focus, or even just a really quick glance, they have such a recognizable silhouette that you only need a split second to process and make a plan. That brings us to a 4th bonus major problem. In the heat of battle, when multiple special zombies are being thrown at you, you need to make a plan as quickly as possible. Which will you take down first? Which will potentially grab onto you or do continuous damage to people? All these decisions need to be made quickly, so the more tools that the game gives you to make those decisions, the better. Let's set up a scenario. Too often, because there's no audio cue, you don't know that there's even a special infected until it's already right on top of you. Then, because you don't know what it is, or rather which variant it is, you can't determine how to react or how to try to counterplay. Then, because you're stumbling around and disoriented because it came out of nowhere, and you don't know what it is, and you can't properly convey this information to your team for them to help you. All of this, more often than not, devolving the encounter into pure chaos. Now, obviously, there is chaos in Left 4 Dead and World War Z, but because of the tools at your disposal, you can either counterplay or coordinate with your friends, making it possible to go through every situation as a well-oiled machine. If A happens, we need to do B. You know everything you need to know. This really makes Back 4 Blood feel like it's just high-intensity shooting gallery rather than the organized chaos that you'd get from Left 4 Dead or World War Z. And when you get through a hard part, at least for me, instead of feeling accomplished and fist-pumping, instead I feel lucky and I just feel drained of energy. Sure, you could argue that I'm much older now than when I first played Left 4 Dead, but I've played it recently and it's still deserving of the classic status. Last point I'll put in here is the Swarm engine. The engine that they use for World War Z is just great, and it feels like a modernized step forward from Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead had large hordes that would come running at you. Having World War Z take that horde and then multiply it by 10 feels like a natural next step when making a Left 4 Dead game. Back 4 Blood hordes never seem to rise to the numbers that you wouldn't have already seen in Left 4 Dead. And remember, Left 4 Dead is 21 year old. Wow, I'm old. For a different example, Dead Rising 3 has way more zombies than the original Dead Rising, because that's what the game was about, mowing down an ocean of zombies. So with 2 generations of console and PCs as powerful as they are now, why is there not a natural increase in the amount of zombies in a horde? Okay, as promised, it is now later, so now more on level design. I brought this up in the visuals because it was relevant as well, but the vistas and set pieces from World War Z are just great to look at and really give a large scope to the world around you and the threat. Oftentimes, those hills in the background aren't just there to inform you of the world around you, making it feel bigger than the corridors that you walk through, but more often than not, those hills will soon be covered in waves of zombies. Every encounter is set up with large courtyards, giant docks with an even bigger yacht behind you, a frozen lake with the Kremlin in the background, and the Colosseum in Rome. All of these set up to not only give you a great set piece, but always set up to give you a front seat in the waves of zombies coming your way. The times that you are inside still have a natural flow of zombies, spawn points, and objectives. Back 4 Blood is opposite in most ways. Everything feels claustrophobic, even the times that you're in the open areas. So many areas are cramped and give you too many corners for zombies to spawn from. And certain zombies, like I stated before, the tall boy and the bruiser, but also the hag, have a weak spot on the back or behind them. Very few levels seem to give you the space needed to properly flank them, or the spawns are designed to come from more bottlenecked directions. So either way, it's not preferable. Then most areas just feel the same, whether it be the 4th or 5th time literally going through this area, or just being set in one topographical area. I really get that they were trying to create this place worth fighting for, but really, unless this was an open world, or even just an open world in the sense of Borderlands, where Borderlands had these big areas that kind of branched off and you could go around. So it wouldn't need to be a GTA necessarily, but even just a more open world would help it when I went past this gas station 4 or 5 times, or this Shamrock 2 or 3 times. Sure, the places after them are different, but it doesn't help its case. Then you get to the new area and the buildings look the same because we're still in the same county, and most buildings in the same part of a state look similar. World War Z is a globe-trotting adventure. New York feels way different and looks different than Jerusalem because they are halfway across the globe from each other, with different architects from different cultures building everything. Then there are the missions themselves and what you'll be doing on them. Each act has several acts inside them, making them feel sort of drawn out. I remember my first time going through Act 1 just wondering when it was going to be over, because I at least wanted to make it through the first act before stopping. By the time I did, I was just like, thank God, instead of feeling some kind of accomplishment. Now let's talk about World War Z. The first episode is New York. Coolest part about this first part is it can show you how the more you make noise, the more zombies will show up. For example, here's me going through the first part with a loud shotgun. There is more zombies that spawn from here, giving more to deal with. And also here, look how many zombies pile up, plus a special zombie. Now, here's the same spot, but with silent guns. You'll notice extra zombies don't spawn from here. And this door now only has a few zombies behind it, and they don't even seem that interested. This is your first encounter of the pyramids that the zombies can make. If you can stop them from climbing, there are very few zombies to deal with on the sides. Neglect them climbing up and you can easily get overrun. World War Z is a little bit more complex, whereas Back 4 Blood is go from here and then go here. That's another negative for Back 4 Blood, is the inconsistency of the level. Some are multi-part levels and some are pretty straightforward. Some take a good amount of time and some are over in a flash. Like, especially if you've played it several times, these levels can go by very quickly. You could argue that this is why the acts are longer, but then you have to stop and think that every 5 to 10 minutes you have to stop, load out of the current map you're on, load into the next map, wait for everyone to choose their cards, have that one rando that always takes a little bit longer, then go into the store to buy supplies, get done with that, then start the new area. And this happens every 5 to 10 minutes. It's just a bit much. There were some levels I felt we were doing the pre-match card and store selection longer than the actual map itself. World War Z is consistently around 20 minutes for each map. I timed the first 2 missions, then I chose a random middle mission down the road, and I tried to explore as much as I would in a normal playthrough, but also tried to keep in mind to keep a steady pace. And in all 3 missions, they were between 20 and 25 minutes. This makes the levels feel much more balanced and spread out properly. This makes each episode of the game, which consists of 3 chapters on most and 4 chapters on 2 of the episodes, it makes them an average of 60 minutes, which makes them feel like a well-paced movie or episodes of a series on something like HBO or Netflix. Then there is the single player. Now, we all know that these games should be played with friends, but sometimes we either can't find somebody to play with or you're just sick of playing with randos. Back 4 Blood does have a single player campaign, but in the worst decision possible, they don't allow you to have any progression, and you don't even get any achievements or trophies if you play this way. I have never seen a co-op game so aggressively discourage single player. Yes, any game that has 4-player co-op was mainly designed with that in mind, but they also go out of their way to make it friendly for solo players, whether it be lower health pools or less enemies, etc. The fact that Back 4 Blood does this, they are just plainly alienating a portion of their audience that would be interested in a game like this. Then we have World War Z, which does have offline, lets you progress, gives you currency, and everything carries over to whenever you do want to play online. There are plenty of classes to grind through, weapons and weapon attachments to unlock, and having the option to grind by yourself while you wait for you or your friend's schedule to line up is a godsend. Then there is the multiplayer and horde mode. To be honest, it's hard to find a match in World War Z. It's been out since 2019 and most people online are doing co-op. I waited in the lobby for 5+ minutes just trying to do my due diligence, and I finally got into a swarm deathmatch, which is deathmatch with a swarm. No, seriously, after a few minutes, you'll have a swarm show up. And this isn't just a few zombies, it's a large horde that if you don't pay attention to, you'll die. This was fine, but it's just multiplayer with zombies. And even though World War Z does have more modes to choose from, like domination, raid, and vaccine hunt, it's kind of pointless to talk about. Equally as pointless to talk about is the swarm mode that nobody asked for, and in fact, the creators specifically promised a story versus mode in previous promotional content. And once again, considering that these are the same creators of Left 4 Dead, sure, Valve keeps the namesake, but you guys built the game and therefore the versus mode. Why is there a deathmatch with a dumb battle royale shrinking circle. Even a regular horde mode that had people as the special ridden would be better than trying to tick some mass appeal checkbox just to trick people into trying out your game mode. Characters. This is the one part that World War Z, I will admit, may not do better than Back 4 Blood. In World War Z, you play as 4 different characters for each of the episodes. So what I mean is, in New York, you play as 4 characters. In Jerusalem, you play as 4 different characters, and then 4 different characters for each new area that you go to. Back 4 Blood has 8 characters that you can mix and match on any act of the game. You can only change characters after each act, but logically you can find your favorite character and play as them through the entire campaign. This obviously lets you get to know them and can make it feel much more fleshed out. In World War Z, you get a very short time. Once again, it's either 60 minutes or 80 minutes. And this makes their personalities very shallow and maybe even archetype. The worst part about the characters in World War Z is the progression carries over throughout the game. So regardless of who you play as, you can make them a max level medic. This just doesn't make sense logically, which means it's there just because video game. Now, the alternative would be to have each character from each episode have a separate progression, but that wouldn't be much of a fix. So I guess I would have just rathered 4 characters going on a globe-trotting adventure. Having said that, this small factor does make it much more faithful to the source material of the book. The original book was more a collection of stories from around the world and how they were living through the apocalypse. So making the game this way actually makes it more faithful than the Brad Pitt movie. Other than the surface level stuff, there's not much to talk about the characters in both games. They each have their punky girl. They both have a guy who takes it way too seriously, and they both have college students that are in the wrong place. It's hard to say that one set of characters is somehow deeper than the other. All you can really say is that in Back 4 Blood, you spend more time with them, so naturally you get to know them better. Weapons. We'll start off with just the facts. World War Z has 7 assault rifles, 3 DMRs, 5 SMGs, 5 shotguns, 3 pistols, 1 sniper, 2 special weapons, and 7 heavy weapons, and 5 melee weapons in the base game, and 9 with Aftermath DLC, for a total of 38 without the DLC and 42 with it. But keep in mind, if you buy it now, you get the Aftermath, so you're getting everything. Back 4 Blood has 4 assault rifles, 2 DMRs, 5 SMGs, 5 shotguns, 7 pistols technically, but 4 of them are just variations of 2. The Beretta gives you a burst fire variation and the Glock gives you a fully auto. But since there's no way to upgrade the base model to have the different fire mode, I'm counting it as separate. 2 sniper rifles, 2 special weapons, or in this case I'll call them LMGs, 0 heavy weapons, 4 melee weapons, for a total of 31. So World War Z wins by the numbers game alone. But then there's the practical side of the game. Back 4 Blood has all the typical guns that you would expect from a shooter. And then you could argue that World War Z does as well. But then they add in the rarity in the attachment system that actually does more harm than good in Back 4 Blood. For example, the fact that you can't transfer or even take off attachments to guns once you put them on. This could mean that you have a green or blue gun with all the attachments you like and fit your playstyle. And then you find a purple or orange gun that statistically does better base damage but doesn't have as good of attachments. Or worse, you buy a shotgun because it has a high rarity and it has a scope, but then you buy it and it turns out it's a friggin' sniper scope. Who the hell would have a sniper scope on a shotgun? And it's not like these are buck shops. Nope. Regular ass shells. But you bought it from the copper store and now you can't get back the gun that you had that was better and you preferred. I'm glad that they made a system that progressively gives you better weapons and even attachments, but locking attachments to guns and not giving you some way of transferring attachments is just counterintuitive. You know who did make a gun system that gives you a sense of progression and choice? I'm sure you can guess it. It's what this entire video is about. World War Z's gun system does a couple of things way better. One, it has a tier system. This is similar to the rarity, but this is really just a way to separate which guns can be better than others. And for common enemies, it really doesn't matter what tier you have, but for the special zombies, you'll be glad to have a tier 3 with a higher base damage. Another thing that it does really right is heavy weapons. These are the weapons that dish out the most amount of damage, but are basically one-time use weapons. Usually they only come with a single magazine, and refilling at an ammo station doesn't refill heavy weapons. These weapons can give you those moments of power fantasy where you're just mowing down zombies like a hot knife through butter. Then there's the fact that you start off with a base model of every gun. Then the more you use said gun, you level it up, and therefore you can unlock more attachments. And these are permanent unlocks across the entire game regardless of who you play as or what class you play as or what episode you are playing. On top of that, several guns give you 2 progression trees to focus on. This usually lets you focus on 2 different attributes of the same gun. So let's give you an example. Here we have the base model of the assault carbine. Power 6, accuracy 6, handling 8, fire rate 7, penetration 1. Then you can see that there are 2 different tier 5 versions of the gun. So one is power 8, accuracy 9, handling 9. Or you can go with this one, power 8, accuracy 7, handling 10. So one of them is made for much more precise mid to long range shooting, and the other handles way better with a shorter barrel that would be better for close to mid range. As I said before, admittedly, it's weird that you carry over the progression like from one person to the next, and from a logical standpoint that just doesn't make any sense, but from a video game standpoint, I very much appreciate that, and it really makes you feel like you are always working towards something. Now, both games have RNG when it comes to what guns you will get and where and when, and both even let you start off with certain weapons depending on who you choose or what class you choose. But at least you know that when you find a random gun in World War Z, it will have the progression attached to it that you have made, instead of Back 4 Blood where you pick up a random gun that will have a random rarity and random attachments that you can't even take off, only add to. Now you could argue that the weapon progression in World War Z just adds grind to the game, where Back 4 Blood usually gives you better weapons as you progress through the act. And honestly, that's a very good point, and I don't really have a rebuttal. Only that I personally prefer working on a gun and feeling the progression as I go on than relying solely on RNG. But that is, after all, my preference. Some people will prefer the Back 4 Blood system. I feel like I've said the word progression enough to warrant progressing onto the progression segment. First, let's touch... What was I saying? First, let's touch on the progression of the levels/missions. Back 4 Blood has a clear rise to its levels, with the latter end of the acts being considerably harder than the first, whereas World War Z's difficulty is mainly balanced throughout the entire game, and the difficulty is more regulated to each individual episode. Like Chapter 1 of Episode 1, New York, is pretty well balanced in the sense of difficulty compared to Chapter 1, Episode 4, Tokyo. Tokyo isn't more difficult because it happens to be the 4th on the list. You can take each episode in whatever order you would like to, and not have to worry about getting completely and unfairly creamed. But rather, Chapter 1, Episode 1, New York is relatively easier than Chapter 4, Episode 1 in New York. Then let's talk about progression in the sense of difficulty, like the one that you can choose at the beginning of each chapter. World War Z has 5 difficulties: easy, normal, hard, insane, extreme, with friendly fire being minimal on easy and normal and increase the more you go up. You start off with a med pack and supplies are plentiful on easy and normal, with supplies becoming more scarce the more you go up. All this feels like a natural increase in difficulty. On top of all that, the difficulties will even recommend what level you should be at before taking them on. Back 4 Blood has 3 difficulties: Recruit, Veteran, and Nightmare, with friendly fire just being off on the first level, at 35% on Veteran and 60% on Nightmare. But from multiple sources and almost every single review out there, there is a clear jump from Recruit to Veteran in the overall difficulty, with most, if not all, stating that there should really be a step in between them. Most will say that Recruit can be way too easy at times, and Veteran too hard all the time, with Nightmare being utterly impossible. On a more personal note, I can certainly second that notion. Just getting out the door on the very first level, on the very first hallway, I was met with several special infected, when normally it would wait until the first horde to throw them at you. Plus, they do so much damage and take so much damage, I could barely make it halfway through the level before everyone died. There needs to be better progression of the difficulty itself. Now, you could argue that Veteran is meant to be played after you have a good custom deck, but I would argue it would take more than one playthrough on Recruit in order to have enough cards. And that's because in order to get new cards, you have to go through what's called supply lines. So these will let you use supply points that you get while you're on one of your runs. Then you can buy more cards and useless cosmetics. But at Recruit, your supply points are cut down by 50%. Plus, you only have 3 support lines at a time, which often led to me going through an entire supply line just to get rid of it, so that hopefully the next one would have the cards that were relevant to my doctor deck build, meaning I am forced to buy cards that I will never use to get ones that I will. So for that reason, I believe in order to really create a deck worthwhile to even go through on a Veteran run, it would take an obscene amount of grinding, which just feels like a cheap way of artificially creating replayability. I want to play a game over and over again because I choose to, not because it's the only way to make a game more challenging. So quick update. Between the time of recording this and editing it, they have changed the way that supply points work. On Recruit, you get the base amount. On Veteran, you get 75% extra, and on Nightmare you get 150 extra. So instead of punishing you at Recruit, they're just making you get more if you have the harder difficulties. This sort of messes with my point a little bit, but my point still stands, and I just wanted to make sure I have updated information. Then there's parts of the game that has a difficulty spike, and I'm left wondering, if this is how hard it is now, how could I ever play this on Veteran, let alone Nightmare? And no amount of get good can help the broken enemy balance, making the progression of the difficulty just the worst part of the game. Then there's the buff, debuff, RPG-like part of the progression. Back 4 Blood solely relies on the card system, which, depending on who you are, is either awesome or just kind of meh. As stated before when speaking about difficulty, the only way to get more cards is the supply lines, which is a bad decision in my opinion, to make you clear out supply runs you don't want and will never use just to get new ones that you hopefully will. And getting things you don't want includes dumb cosmetics that you will also never use because sometimes it's for characters that you will never use. This is really the worst way to force people to play the game over and over again and cross their fingers. And now a lot of that's what I've already said before. Something I haven't said before is how you build the decks. You can choose between 15 cards. During each pre-match, you can choose one of 5 cards. These cards show up in the same order that you have in the deck. So this begs the question, if you can customize the deck and you can customize it to the degree of what order the cards will show up, then why does it not just let you keep the buffs as you go on? Why does it have the card system at all if you can choose what order they show up in? Like, I think the developers had this vision of people creating 2, 3, 4 decks and swapping between them depending on the situation. But this doesn't seem like a viable thing to do for a few reasons. The characters already have certain skills that make it seem like a no-brainer as to what build would work for them. Example, Doc has a personal buff that gives 20% buff to healing efficiency, and then a team buff to 25% trauma resistance. So it seems like this is a great healing-oriented deck. Sure, you could make this character good at melee, but other characters would already be good at this. Like Holly, who has the ability to recover 10 stamina after killing a Ridden, and team stamina increases by 25. Or Evangelo, who has stamina regeneration increased by 25% and team movement speed increased by 5%. So since melee has a lot to do with stamina, both of these characters would make more sense of a melee build. So the point stands that Doc would make more sense as a medical build. Chances are that people will mainly be playing with their friends or people that they know online. And because of this, choose 1, maybe 2 characters, but really everybody's gonna naturally find their main character. So this idea of building multiple decks is just unlikely. Of course, I could be mainly talking about my own personal playstyle and how I go about it. So this is very much not an objective fact and rather just a subjective fact for me. But also, you cannot swap characters or decks until the end of these long ass acts. So this also destroys the idea of creating 2 to 3 decks because you can't switch between them for the situation because you can't switch until the end of an act. I already covered a good portion of the weapon progression for World War Z and why it's great. And I'll only reiterate that Back 4 Blood doesn't have a progression to the guns themselves, but rather some cards that can buff the guns and in-match RNG. So I don't feel I need to go over the guns again. So now let's get to talk about classes. Well, Back 4 Blood has 8 characters who all have 2 character traits and 1 team buff. World War Z has 6 classes at launch and 2 with the Aftermath DLC. These classes have 9 skill trees each, consisting of buffs and sometimes additional traits to abilities. Each class also has 4 prestige ranked perks. Each individual tier then has 3 selections to choose from on that tier. You can only choose 1 skill for each tier, but it gives you a lot of choice. Each class has its own playstyle, its own role to play in battle, its own weapon loadout. All the tiers help you further customize your class and playstyle. Let's take a quick look at 2 examples. We're only going to cover the first 2 tiers because the video is already 47 minutes long. First one up, pretty basic soldier, the Gunslinger. He starts off with a frag grenade and a compact SMG. Movement has no effect on the weapon accuracy. Recoil affected also reduce. Then you have segment 1, which you can only choose one of these. Fire in the hole. The grenade can kill 25% more targets. Impact grenade. Frag grenade explodes on impact. They deal 100% more damage, but have 50% smaller radius. Power nap. Unequip a weapon, automatically reloads after 7 seconds. So then segment 2, which once again you can only have one of these, swapping mags. Reload speed increased by 25%. Frontline supply. Headshots made with primary or secondary weapons automatically restores 5% rounds to the magazine. Adrenaline. Reloading a weapon with less than 25% ammo in the magazine provides a 50% reload boost for 5 seconds. The second one is the Medic, which is the one I play as mainly if I'm playing in multiplayer, and that is the Doctor. So, you start with a stim pistol, compact SMG, and a free medkit. Using a medkit on a teammate will also apply 25% of it to you. The stim pistol itself will give a temporary health boost to whoever you shoot it at, and you can shoot it at yourself. So segment 1, Doctor in the house. Medkits heal 10% more. Base is at 70, so that means it's 80%. Triage. Apply medkits 50% faster. The base is 4 seconds, so that means it's going to be 2 seconds. Sugar-coated. Healing a teammate with a medkit also grants them a temporary health boost. So segment 2, patch up. Restore 30% health to teammate after reviving them. Paramedic. Revive speed increased by 50%. Pick me up. When you revive a teammate, both of you gain a temporary health boost. All of the classes and the tiers you unlock can carry over from one episode to the next, and it doesn't matter what character you play as. Again. Logically, this doesn't make any sense, but I definitely appreciate it as a game feature. And all tiers are available from the beginning of an episode to the end, and not some pointless system where you pick one at a time between matches. I can't think of a game that would do that, but kinda stupid by comparison. The class progression is great and allows you to customize your playstyle. It has a great feel of progression, with more basic ones at the beginning and more game-changing ones towards the end. And best of all progression, the weapons, the classes, allows you to progress through the higher difficulties without annoying RNG. Well, less of it. All of this mixes and mashes together to make the basis of what makes gameplay. We might as well use this last segment to summarize and recap everything. So both games play very similarly. Back 4 Blood is a first-person shooter, and it has you take on hordes of Ridden and Special Infected using a combination of guns, melee weapons, and throwable equipment, with an emphasis on the game director always changing the experience as you go and mixing things up. World War Z is a third-person shooter or a first-person shooter with the newest DLC that has you take on hordes of zombies or Zeeks with Special Infected, using a combination of guns, melee weapons, and throwable equipment, with an emphasis of taking on giant floods of enemies and facing insurmountable odds. Back 4 Blood is made by the same studio who brought us the Left 4 Dead series, Turtle Rock, and is labeled as a spiritual successor. World War Z is made by Saber Interactive, and they were instead merely inspired by the classic, and in a lot of ways makes innovations on the formula. Not quite enough to make it surpass the classic, but enough to, in my personal opinion, to surpass the attempt that Turtle Rock did with Back 4 Blood. Back 4 Blood seems like a version we'd get that is manufactured by a corporation that just looked at a Left 4 Dead, copied its work, made enough changes to make it considered different, and enough extra, but no more than it needs to be considered quote-unquote more than Left 4 Dead. Back 4 Blood seems like someone who wanted to make a game as close to Left 4 Dead without actually putting in extra effort. World War Z, and the fact that they were inspired by rather than attempting to recreate, I feel this actually gives them an advantage. Instead of people expecting Left 4 Dead 3, they can be pleasantly surprised at the traits it shares with Left 4 Dead while appreciating the additions that they made. And the developers have the freedom to make a game in the direction they want to because there isn't this dark cloud hanging over them. World War Z is like Left 4 Dead, but Left 4 Dead if it was done by a cover band. The classic is still available. This is just their rendition of the song. Some might prefer this version, but the classic will always be there. Back 4 Blood is more like hearing the difference between a song on an album versus in concert years later. The studio version, or the classic version, was made of a collection of perfect takes. It is the most perfect version of the song. The concert is a recreation of that song. It's sung and performed by the same people, but people are imperfect. Maybe the timing can be just a little bit off. They can add in some more flourishes for the sake of showmanship. There are certainly parts that are better than the original or the first time you heard it, but it won't ever feel the same as the first time you were hearing it in the most pristine and polished version. Now, obviously, this analogy won't work for everybody. After all, X-Band is great live, and I prefer them live, but hopefully you can see what I mean. Back 4 Blood shamelessly uses the tagline from the makers of Left 4 Dead, but it doesn't earn it. And admittedly, World War Z shamelessly uses the license name of the book and movie because they were worried about having a brand new IP, and they used the name World War Z to help with marketing. But in my opinion, they earned the name. But just like this entire video and everything contained inside, this is my opinion. So I have laid out in excruciating detail why I personally believe that World War Z is a better Left 4 Dead than Back 4 Blood. My goal would never be to put down anyone who loves Back 4 Blood. If you like it, great. Let me know in the comments down below. But if you played Back 4 Blood and were maybe just let down like me, my goal is to show you why World War Z is a better fit and a more modern homage to Left 4 Dead. Either way, we are finally at a close. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of whatever this is. I had a lot of fun creating this. It took me almost a whole week for the script, trying to make it as perfect as possible. It took me 3 times sitting down and recording because it's just a lot to record this much. And now it's time to edit, and it's gonna be a long one. It's definitely something that's taken me a lot of time. So if you've listened to this whole thing, even if you disagree with me, but you think the quality is good, please, please, please give me a like and definitely comment. Even if you disagree with me and you love Back 4 Blood, or you think that nothing could ever even come close to Left 4 Dead, and so I'm stupid for even comparing World War Z to it, let me know down in the comments below. I would just love for this video to do really good and, you know, kind of get it out there. I don't think I've ever made something this intricate. I've had podcasts where I've talked for like a whole hour, but usually it wasn't about one single subject, or if it was like Marvel's Endgame and I had other people who were also talking. So this was a lot of fun. I think I'm definitely gonna do something like this again, but we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe. You know, if you like this video, if you like the quality of the video, please like share it with people and let's get it out there. I'd really appreciate it. All right, so I was Nick from Threat X Reproductions, and you guys have a great day.